Welcome to the show, folks. This is Wrestling Changed My Life. Here we go.
I like to say I'm not very good at losing, which is good. So I was competitive, I was driven, and I wanted to be successful. So I got into training largely because of wrestling and the demands of the sport, being a physical sport.
We can endure anything and adapt and pivot and change. Wrestling gave us that ability.
I would say nothing in life has impacted me more than the things wrestling has taught me in terms of self-reflection, resilience.
Toughness. Some guys have it, some guys don't.
Adversity, 100%. How to pick myself up and be a man after I failed.
And everything that has shaped my life and where I'm at today would not be there without the values and basically the lessons I've learned through the sport of wrestling.
For me, wrestling saved my life because it allowed me to focus and channel my energy.
We're fortunate if you wrestled, because if you wrestled, natural talent helps, but it's 5% of the ingredient. It pales in comparison to heart and technique and effort.
It humbled me, taught me humility. Nothing can humble you more than wrestling. I think it's the learning to adapt, right? You learn how to adapt, you learn how to solve problems.
You know, if I look back at my time I spent wrestling, if it gave me one thing more than anything else, it's mental toughness.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Wrestling Changed My Life podcast. This is your host, Ryan Warner. My guest today is the great Mike Barwis. He's a strength and conditioning guru, and he's worked with the Red Wings, the Mets, and formerly the Dolphins. He's now the CEO of Barwis Performance Centers. And get this, he's trained Olympians in over 40 sports. Pretty incredible. And as you can guess, folks, Mike got his start in wrestling. He's trained a ton of world-class wrestlers. He's one of the most enthusiastic and positive people you'll meet. So I hope you enjoy it. Fan of the week goes to my man, Nathan Lexfold. That's Lexfold N on the gram. He's a dairy farming wrestling coach. Thank you so much for tuning in, Nathan. Greatly appreciate it. And folks, this episode is brought to you by Competitor Supreme. It's the Dan Gable 1990s movie, which you can now stream on WrestlingChangeMyLife.com. Just go to Wrestling Change My Life, click the tile for Competitor Supreme. It's on the homepage. Use the promo code GABLE to get a free rental. It's normally $2, but if you use the promo code, we'll give you a free rental on the house. And that's it, folks. Let's give it up for the great Mike Barwis. Peace! Sir, you are a world-renowned trainer, but you were just mentioning to me, got started early in the sport. How'd you get introduced to wrestling?
My older brother wrestled when I was young. I'm from Pennsylvania. I mean, Pennsylvania's a wrestling state. So growing up, my older brother wrestled. I was probably about 5 or 6 and got into wrestling and wrestled, majority of my young life. So love the sport, love the discipline, love the demands, love the intensity, love the pressure. All of those things for me are really, they are what I am. And I think wrestling had a big part in building that inside me and allowing me to achieve those aspects of my character.
Were you into performance training and the like you are now? Back in high school, were you way into like lifting and things like that?
You know, I was. I trained a lot because of wrestling. To be honest, I didn't like to lose, and I like to say I'm not very good at losing, which is good. So I was competitive, I was driven, and I wanted to be successful. So I got into training largely because of wrestling and the demands of the sport, being a physical sport, knowing that I had to be in better shape than the people I competed against cardiovascularly, as well as I've always been really strong for my size. So I was able to dominate people physically, and that was a huge assistance, especially at a young age when guys were less technical.
Sure. I mean, that's a lot of guys from, I was from the country myself. A lot of guys got by like that. Like we always said, guys from the city, great technique, but the country, if you can, put on some muscle, you can make up some pretty big strides there. And so how did you just give us the 30-second summary from high school to what you're doing now? Because you run a plethora of organizations, and we're going to deep dive different pockets of your career. But just to start, let people know what you're doing now and the kind of work you do.
The Barwis Corporations, I was the head, I was the director of human performance at West Virginia University for 17 years. I ran the University of Michigan. I work with 9 pro sports teams. I run the New York Mets. I run the Detroit Red Wings. Overall as the director of human performance and sports science. I've worked in just about every professional sport you can imagine. Wrestling's never left my life. I still train wrestlers now. I still, Logan Massa comes down the off season and works out. I've got Logan Storley here right now, who's now a fighter. I've got, a ton of guys that will always be a part of my life. Wrestling has never left. I trained the wrestling team at West Virginia all those years, and I worked with wrestling at Michigan as well. When I left Michigan, I decided that I wanted to branch out. My background's in physiology, and one of my specializations is the neural area, and I have worked with, as God's blessing, but I had worked with many people with disabilities and been able to help them, and I didn't, God did, but I was a part of it, and I'm thankful for that. And being in an environment where I was always competitive, I knew that I wanted to maintain that competitive level of what I did for a career. I went into school thinking I wanted to be a doctor. I did very well in the academics. I did not really like the environment. I'm not going to lie. It was a little bit too stagnant for me. I'm pretty intense. I'm energetic. I'm very positive. I'm very driven. And I love the science part of it, but the working environment was a little bit more challenging. So getting to a point where I kind of decided what direction I was going to go. This field that I'm in now was relatively young. It was semi-non-existent. Most people who did it were, hey, I played football and now I'm your strength coach. And I was in a time where I could take science, and I was kind of a rarity, and bring science to training and performance. So I started to do so and work my way through programs at West Virginia, and ended up running the entire institution, and built the program there, and expanded it and grew it to a level where we were highly competitive in all sports, including wrestling, and had some great success. Greg won 3 national titles and was an outstanding wrestler and dominated everybody. Wasn't for one, he had a little mental breakdown one time, and outside of that, he tore everybody apart. I trained his older brother, Virtus. Just for years, it was fun to be around that program and excel. And when I left West Virginia, I went to Michigan. And
just football or all sports at Michigan?
I took on, originally they wanted me to do all sports, but it was kind of a crazy task to take it on that quick. And instead, I helped them with a hiring process for other individuals, and I worked with the wrestlers. I took on football. I took on ice hockey. I took on softball, and took on some soccer and tried to help some other stuff too. So I said we're going to do football, and I ended up taking everything on by group one by one because people would ask, and I'd help, and I just like to help. Look, God put me here for a reason, and my job is to help people achieve what's inside them, what he put inside them, and the more people that came to me, the more I wanted to help. So I did, and ended up working with those programs, and we had some great success. And when I left there, I decided that I wanted to combine the neural aspect of what I did and studied in physiology with the elite athletes, the general population, just a totally unique environment. And I built the Barwis companies from the ground up, and now there's 37 of them worldwide. We're the only private organization in the world that runs professional sports teams. We have gyms around the country and around the world, in the country of Georgia over here, and
you do.
We do everything you can imagine in human performance.
In Georgia, the country?
Yeah, Tbilisi, Georgia. We have a center.
Wow, that's a wrestling hotbed, man.
Yeah, we got some horses over there.
God.
So, pro wrestling. A number of people we train over there, a lot of Olympic athletes over there. So, it's been great. So it's kind of the journey in a brief way. It's kind of hard to explain it that fast.
That was good, man. I mean, the example to me that highlights how you're different is Brock Mueller. And, I know you know that name well. And for the folks who don't, we're going to get into it. But, you were at West Virginia, strength and conditioning, and you're starting to work in science into it, and you have your own system, your own methodology, and it's pretty much at that point been focused on the top 1% of all athletes. Then you get to Michigan and you meet this guy Brock. What was that experience like, and what do you take away from that to this day?
He changed my life, and I should say God changed my life by putting him in it. And I went into medicine because I like helping people.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to make a difference. I wanted to impact people. And I took the science and devised programs that were cutting edge and people weren't doing. And we're still ahead of the research and do a lot of the testing and all those aspects that ends up getting filtered down into the world of strength and conditioning for sport. And we're having tremendous success. In West Virginia, we had they call it the golden era, the most successful years they've ever had in the history of the program. We were dominating in every aspect, and really across the board in all of our sports were nationally ranked. And we were doing it with 1- and 2-star recruits, kids that were grinders and hard workers and blue collar families that just wanted to get in and battle. And we were working hard. We had great kids. They worked hard. And for me, I wasn't really fulfilled. For me personally, I loved my people. It was the most fun I ever had coaching athletes. I just enjoyed it. It was a blast. But I felt like I wasn't doing all I could do. I felt like there were restrictions and limitations that I had bestowed upon myself, that there was more I could do. And my wife was coaching with me. She was the strength and conditioning coach for 9 years as well. And we had a conversation one time, and I just said, look, she's like, what else do you want? Like, how much more do you have to do? And I said, honestly, she's like, you work 100 hours a week. You're literally there between 90 and 100 hours a week.
Seriously, though, that was a real week for you back then, just going?
Yeah. I mean, I go in 17 hours a day at least, and I was 7 days a week. So that was pretty much it. So, I mean, that's what we did, 17 hours, 7 days a week. When I started the program, didn't have much assistance, and I wanted to be great, so I worked on it, and from my perspective, trying to make sure that I achieved what I set out to do. I'm a person who, if I feel like I left something on the table, I'm not satisfied, and that's when everything happened there. We had tremendous success. We turned the programs around. We were winning largely because of the wonderful people we worked with and the drive and their willingness to do what other people wouldn't do to succeed, right? I mean, people say all the time, like, hey, I want the uncommon things. Well, you can't have uncommon things, unless you're willing to do the uncommon things to achieve them.
Mm-hmm.
You can't do common things and expect uncommon results. Life doesn't work that way.
Right.
So as a result, we were able to work harder than everybody else and win. And that factor was exciting and rewarding. But I felt like there were people who were hurting in other areas that cognitively I was very capable of helping. And I felt like, why wasn't I doing that? And what was it that wasn't making me feel like I was all that I was, or all that I needed to be, that I was designed to be. And so I talked with my wife, and she said, we can't work more hours. You got to figure out what else you need to do to make things happen. And she's a very religious person, and probably was, I wouldn't even say probably, is definitely what sounded me and grounded me into a position where I am today. And she was right. I need to figure out how to make that work, but I didn't know what that was. We were 33-3 in football then. Our wrestling team was, I think, number 7 in the country. We had done very, very well, and we were winning everywhere, Sweet 16, Elite 8, Final Fours, basketball, just everybody, nationally competitive in soccer and every sport, and winning. Rifle wins national championships in West Virginia like they're going out of style. So that was pretty regular. But looking at that era.
How did Brock come into the picture throughout all this?
So I had tremendous value in what I did, but I was still missing something. And we played the end of the year that year. We played Pitt. We were number 1 in the country. We were about to play for a national championship in football, which we should have played Oklahoma. They get upset in a fluke game. We're playing Pitt, who's awful at that time, by the way. I think they had 3 wins. We've got Pat White, leading rusher in the history of college football, as a quarterback. We've got Steve Slayton in the backfield, Noel Devine. We're loaded, right? We're a nasty team. We got kids up for the Heisman. We go out and play a terrible Pitt team and do everything we can to score. And for some reason, we have like 400 yards to their 200 yards. We can't get it in the end zone. Pat White dislocates his thumb, can't play. Steve Slayton sprains his ankle. And Pat McAfee, who's now Barstool Sports, who I coached for years and a good friend, is our kicker. He never misses field goals. People beat him up for this for years. The guy is a 4-time Pro Bowler and the greatest kicker in the history of West Virginia University, and people are still angry with him because he missed a couple field goals in that game that they say cost us the game. I'm pretty sure we made some other friggin' mistakes. I'm pretty sure. So we lose the game, and when that happened, it knocks us out of a national championship. West Virginia's never had one in football, and the state feels it hard, and everything falls apart. And people are upset, people are crying, people are throwing things on the field. It was ugly. And Rich Rodriguez gets offered the job at the University of Michigan. Initially, I had no plan on going. I was like, look, I'm staying here.
Was he at West Virginia before that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So it is what it is. I'm staying here. John Beeline had gone to Michigan and offered me to come the year before, and we had talked and didn't want to do it then. And I didn't really know much about Michigan. I'm not going to lie. It's not that I didn't like them. I just didn't know anything about them.
Mm-hmm.
I turned down 21 jobs in 2 years. I was waiting for what was right and what I felt like God was calling me to do. And when we turned down Alabama the year before, people don't know that, but yeah, so I turned down quite a few good jobs. We turned down Alabama the year before, and when that happened, there were certain things that were promised to Rich Rodriguez for the coaches and other things, and those things didn't come to fruition with the president who was in there after they were promised. And I'm a person of I'm honest. I have integrity. I expect people around me to do the same and be the same. And that was kind of a push over the hump at the last minute. And I decided that I felt like God was calling me to go to Michigan. I didn't want to leave my kids because I love my kids there. They were my family. But I really felt like God was calling me to move. I prayed a lot. And when I arrived at Michigan, we won. The crazy part is we went and played in the Fiesta Bowl against Oklahoma. And Oklahoma was the team that was number 2 on one and 1 on the other. We were 2 on the other. And we beat them like 47-14. Crushed them. So we should have won the national championship. Whoops. But we just annihilated them, right? And that let me know that it was supposed to happen.
Mm.
This is sometimes that you don't lose to a 3-win Pitt team and crush Oklahoma, the number 2 team, the way you did, and beat everybody the way you did all year, unless something's supposed to happen. And it did. And upon arriving at the University of Michigan, the first 2 people I met, one Brandon Graham, which is a unique story in himself, who's now a high-level defensive end for the Philadelphia Eagles, one of the best in the country, and was Elliott Mueller. Elliott Mueller was an Ohio State fan his entire life. He's Brock's older brother. And he grew up in Wauseon, Ohio. Ohio State, big O on the wall. No one in his family liked Michigan. And for some reason, he felt at the same time like he was being called to visit Michigan, even though he wanted to go to Ohio State. And I think his dad had a conversation with him and told him that it wasn't God talking to him because God hates Michigan. But he ended up going visiting the University of Michigan, and as his entire life he hated Michigan and was an Ohio State fan and committed on the spot. He was supposed to do it. So he goes to the University of Michigan. I fly back from the Fiesta Bowl, land in West Virginia, get a plane, fly to Michigan. It's freezing cold. I just left Arizona. I walk off the plane. I walk into the gym. I'm getting ready to meet with the athletic director, and here's this kid. And we end up in the same place, same time as God would have it. And
he's random.
Random. And at the last minute, I made my decision. At the last minute, he made his. And he walks in with a sling on. And I said, "What's up, buddy? How you doing?" I start talking to him. "Who are you?" He said, "Hey, I'm Elliott Mueller. I'm an offensive lineman in Wauseon, Ohio." And I said, "What's up with the sling? Just tear your shoulder up." And he kind of got stoic. I'm fresh back from a Fiesta Bowl championship, and I got 27 rings. They're in a closet somewhere. My kids play with them to throw darts. They don't mean anything, right? People do. Mm-hmm. So, the journey is what matters. It's not the end destination. It's not the trophy you get. It's what you did along the way that gives that value. And the people you come in contact with are what make things valuable in life. And so I looked at him and I said, what happened? And he said, "Coach, we were coming home from church Christmas Eve, and his eyes started to well up. And he said, we stopped at a stop sign, proceeded through the stop sign. 90-year-old man ran the stop sign going 80 mile an hour, hit my family broadside. My girlfriend died in my arms. Sorry.
No problem.
My brother's paralyzed, and my father died. My mother got out unscathed, and I tore my arm out of this. I tore my rotator cuff ripping the door off the hinges to get my brother out of the car. So I remember thinking to myself, like, look, all these rings, all these championships, all of this time, 44 different sports, over 5,000 Olympic and professional athletes. What really matters is life, people, and what they do with the time they're given and how they impact others. And I looked at him and said, I'm so sorry to hear it. I was just crushed. I came off a big high. And he said, well, we saw a motivational thing that you did because I motivational speak. And my brother's in the hospital and we were watching it. And, a lot of press about you coming here and we're excited. And he's like, would you mind going to see him sometime? And I said, no, I'll go right now. You want to go? Let's go. So we did. We grabbed the O-line coach and we headed out. And went right to the hospital. I missed a meeting with the athletic director day one, which probably wasn't advisable, but I figured this was pretty important. So we went to the hospital and Brock was in there. He was broken. He was tattered. Spine was broken. They had already given him less than a 1% chance of ever walking again. His arm was, contorted and fractured, and he was paralyzed. And I looked at him and started talking to him. The thing that amazed me is he was positive. He looked in my eyes and he said, Coach, I'm going to be okay. Thanks for coming to see me. And I was making him laugh and joke. And I said, listen, nobody in here has this answer. It's up to God's will and your work to decide what happens. They cannot look at every cell in your body and determine the functional capacity. They're giving you odds based on what they know with their rehabilitation philosophy of what is paid for by insurance, what has been done in the past, what has contributed to people walking, and the cases that are specifically like yours have a low chance of walking in that environment. Mm-hmm. Change the environment. Change the environment. Do more than what others did and try and make it happen. And see if God will your work to accomplish something. And he smiled, and when I left, I think the physical therapist looked at him and said, that guy's nuts. He's a physiologist. He's really smart. I know, I got you. But you got to get used to being in a chair. You got to get used to being paralyzed. And it's not the part of the physical therapist. It's just that's all that usually happens in that circumstance. So for 2 years, Brock went to rehabilitation and couldn't walk. He used to come to practice, and we'd roll him around the wheelchair. We'd throw balls at him and catch. We all mess around, joke. And his mom called me and said, look, I wanted to talk to you. After 2 years, they cut his insurance off, and they're not going to cover it anymore. And he's a mess. His dad's gone. He doesn't have anyone to talk to, and he respects you and believes in you. Would you mind talking to him? So I did, and we had a conversation, and we had a long talk. And my assistant at the time, Parker Whiteman, and I had a long conversation about, hey, look, I'm willing to help the kid, whatever he wants to do. And so I asked him, I said, well, do you want to walk or not? And he looked at me, got kind of pissed. He looked at me and he said, yeah, I want to walk, Coach. I've tried for 2 years. I can't. And he said, but I don't know what to do now. I don't really have that option. I said, well, whenever you're ready, you let me know. I'll start training you. And he said, he looked at me, he said, you're already here from sunup to sundown. When are you going to do it? I said, don't make excuses, son. I'm not making any. You don't make any. And he looked at me, he smiled. I said, I'll meet you whatever time we can be here. It doesn't matter. So we did. We integrated Brock into it, and we started working with Brock. And in 6 weeks, we had a twitch with a new system that I wrote from scratch to engineer the program. And my assistant, Parker Whiteman, and I worked with him every day. And in 6 months, he led us out of the tunnel in front of 110,000 people on canes. It's the loudest that I know of, still recorded in the history of the University of Michigan in the stadium. If you look it up, Brock Miller Big Ten Network piece is the piece that won an Emmy. Big Ten's only Emmy, actually. They won an Emmy, and then I did a TED Talk on it as well, Mike Barwis TED Talk. But watching him change, and every day him struggling and fighting and battling and keeping him in the gym around the team, and the team seeing it, didn't just change Brock's lives. life. It changed the lives of his family who were fighting and struggling with him and dealing with his pain that they couldn't solve. It changed the lives of the boys that were in the gym and the men that were in the gym trying to grow themselves and watch his fight and realize that their fight was easier and they could do more than they thought. And they were inspired by him. He was inspired by them. And it was the way man is meant to be. We look to each other and inspire one another. We draw something out of a human being that you can feel in a presence when somebody has that.
Mm-hmm.
And when you get that, life changes. God wills things to change. And he ended up leading us out of the tunnel in front of 110,000 people, touching the banner. I refused to walk with him. It was his moment and God's moment and his family's moment. I met him at halfway across the field and helped him off. We got to the sideline, and the players, I'm kind of a gruff, as you can hear the voice, harder guy, and the players looked at me and they were all crying. Man. And they said, "Coach, you crying?" And I said, "No, if Brock could walk right, he wouldn't be kicking dirt in my damn eye." And they all started laughing. So we all joked, but at that moment I knew life had to change. That it wasn't just about impacting these athletes. I was denying what else was put inside me cognitively, physically, mentally, that I could give to the world. And while I was training Brock, people didn't know I had taken our defensive coordinator's daughter, had a taxi and a rare bundle of blood vessels wrapped around her brainstem. She was a lacrosse player at Columbia and had become ataxic and couldn't walk either. And she ended up jogging by the time we were done. And she danced at her wedding, and she has babies now, and she's we rehabbed her at the same time because I was watching him working with her on the field and I couldn't stand it. I'm like, "Give me her, I'll take her too." So I took her, I took Brock, and then there was another buddy of mine whose buddy, Andy, had brain cancer for years and had lost the ability to walk, and we got him walking too. And all three of them that were impossible scenarios ended up walking, running, doing their things again. And I realized that God had given me the opportunity to do what I wanted to do a long time. I didn't deserve it. He just gives you what you don't deserve. That's grace.
Yeah.
And I ended up in a position where it was time for me to do what I was supposed to do, not just what I wanted to do.
And that's what you're doing now. You do a little bit of both. You know, pro athletes, a little bit of what we're talking about there. I don't know if you call it rehabilitation or what it is, but that's another segment of your work.
Yeah. So we wrote the program for neurological reengineering. Neurological reengineering is us.
Got it.
We wrote that for neuroclients. People fly from India, Australia, England, all over the world to come to us. We're like top, rehab clinic for neural patients around the world, and people fly in from all countries. We've had now, hundreds of people walk at this point now, and I haven't. God has. I got nothing to do with it. I'm just a dummy. Let's be a part of it. So,
let me ask you this, Coach. You are a guy who's extremely optimistic, and I've got that from everything I've read about you, and definitely from this interview. How much of the taking someone who can't walk to walk is instilling the belief in them that something else is possible versus the science behind it? I'm sure it's a little bit of both, but how would you weight those two? Like, if
it's both. I think it's that. I think it's the environment. I put them in an environment it's not sedated. It's not
beige walls at a rehab center.
Yeah, it's intense. It's inspiring. It's driven. You can get more out of yourself hormonally in that environment than you can in a sedentary environment. It's just, the caring, the love, the support, the fact that you believe in them, therefore they believe in themselves. And the science is very intricate. And what I wrote, everything I wrote in physiology was neurally based. Every program I write is neurally based. Mm-hmm. So I took all of the different facets of how I developed the neurological programs for our athletes, and I reconverted those facets back to the medical side where I had originally studied and said, I'm going to take all the things I've learned from making a person 1% better in one area by doing this with the neural system, and I'm going to combine it to someone who can't move at all. And we put it all together, and it was God's design. He brought me through it all in a way that everything I did from the time I started wrestling when I was little to the time I went into physiology and medicine to the time I was in athletics all led me back to the same place with the answers I needed. So my history and my journey gave me the answers for the problems that I was faced with. And now, You know, we do PT, we do chiro, we do performance training. We work with over 5,000 Olympic and pro athletes in 44 sports. We work with everything that walks or talks and some that don't, and sooner or later they will. That's it.
God, I mean, you think about the randomness of you being at that open practice football field the same time as Brock's brother, and you don't think it's random at all. You know, you think that's, you know, and I respect that. And it's exciting to think that, you know, you never know until the next day until something's going to happen, right? You know, you just keep putting your head down and doing the right things, and eventually, you know, connections will be made like that, like you're saying. I want to go into the science a little bit because I've heard you talk about Wolf's Law, and that was developed during during the Soviet Union, and maybe I'm wrong on that, but I'm really fascinated by that. Talk about Wolf's Law a little bit and how that impacts your methodology.
You know, the body conforms and adapts to the intensities and directions it's habitually subjected to, right? So that's Wolf's Law. Wolf's Law was originally designed as a law of bone, for bone, right? So if a bone takes an impact, it will conform and adapt to that given intensity that was applied to it, and in the direction that that intensity was applied, if it happens on a habitual basis, sometimes acutely as well with a bone, right? So if I continue to smack a bone in small areas, it deposits calcium, right?
Yeah. If
I add a stress to a bone, it thickens and strengthens. If you think of weight training, what are we doing with a woman with osteoporosis? We give her calcium, right, and bone matrix nutrition, and then we allow to accommodate stressors on the bone, which causes the bone to thicken and strengthen. We know that. That's a law of bone for sure, but what we realized was it wasn't just that. It's a law of medicine. Everything in the human body conforms and adapts to the intensities and directions it's habitually subjected to. Life does, you know, and looking at that and saying, what is it really? Let's take the squat, for instance, right? If I take a bar and I put it on my back, the body will conform and adapt to the intensity. Let's say it's 500 pounds. To 500 pounds in a downward direction if I do it on a regular basis. What do? You take calcium out of your diet, you thicken the bones in your legs, you thicken the bones in the spine, you strengthen all the structures to allow for them to handle load. Your connective tissue changes and allows for greater stress. Your muscles adapt to overcome those forces. All of those things conform and adapt to those intensities and directions. And so do our cells in our body, everything we do, right? So devising our programs for me was really simple. I'm going to take the way our body adapts to things and adapt my system around the body, the way the body was designed. Instead of asking a design structure to adapt to me, I already know that it adapts to these things. I know there's an end goal to accommodate my results, right? I'm going to work from the end goal backwards so I know where I'm actually going. I don't want to be wearing a blindfold trying to drive my car home. You know, I'm going to work end goal backwards so I know where I'm going, and I know where I need to end up with a cell. Because everybody says you train sport specific. Not really. You train cellular specific. Because what you're doing is providing a specific stimulus to a given cell to accommodate and elicit a desired adaptation. Therefore, I've got to know where I want to end up to get there. Otherwise, I can't provide the appropriate stimulus. So I started working backwards and saying, how do I design every facet of training from speed, agility, plyometrics, you know, explosive training, impulse training, weightlifting to adhere to the end destination with the systems we desire and supply the accurate stimulus to cell to get the desired result. And Wolf's Law is the governing body of how that happens, you know, and if you randomly supply stimulus, you randomly get results. If there's no given design direction, it's like going into the wrestling room and saying, today I'm going to just do 27 different things, flip around, no cues. I'm not going to work on technique. Then I'm going to go wrestle.
Right.
Life doesn't work that way. You're going to get the snot beat out of you because your body isn't going to be functionally able to adapt and accommodate the things necessary for you to achieve. And that's what Wolf's Law is.
Well, think about when people go to space. That's the Wolf's Law in reverse. When people go to space, you know, they lose bone density. They get shorter. It's like the freakiest things. And so what you do differently then is you take this overarching methodology, and I've seen videos of you working with baseball players. You do really niche specific exercises, and we're talking about the 1%er, so you're looking for just that little bit more. But so you find these exercises that are specific to that sport, not just, hey, we're going to do curls because everyone does curls, right? You're doing these very specific movements. If we focus on the wrestling world and knowing that there's a lot of high school and college kids who listen to this, you can take this a couple ways. A couple misconceptions that you'd like athletes to stop doing now, training-wise, or what are some things they could do that you think they're probably doing just because it's status quo, but they should be doing because you think there's some science behind it? So, either way you want to take that, I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that.
Wrestling's unique. And as you said, when we bring in an athlete, we actually screen them. I wrote the ARS screen for neural clients. We use it for our athletes now, and we use it in all of our pro teams. And it's a screen of every joint, the function, the capacity, the forces, and then I have charts, and then we build out correctives based on imbalances that sports supply, right? So wrestling, we're always hunched over, the head's down, we're in flexion. A lot of those positions, there's a lot of things we have to counteract to stabilize the shoulder, the spine. Then we build out a performance program. So we have the corrective program and the performance program intertwined, right? Because the body conforms and adapts to intensities, directions, eventually subjected to. So the sport provides those intensities and directions. So there's things we have to counteract in the sport as well as things we have to enhance. I think a lot of times things that I see, especially with a lot of athletes around the world and even some pro teams, things aren't very balanced. They don't realize that most of what you do is anterior and that you have to balance the posterior more excessively than you do the anterior so that you don't get anterior excessive development and end up with risk of injury.
Real quick, what does that mean, the anterior and the interior for the layman among us?
So anterior is like, for instance, in wrestling, our shoulders are always hunched forward, right? So that means we're protracted. Our shoulders are here. It means most of our tension's here. Then we're going to go in and we're going to bench, and we're going to do dumbbell bench, and we're going to do a whole bunch more. And we don't really recognize that the subscap, all the rhomboids, the retractors, the lat, I actually need to do those more than I do the front side because they're already getting overemphasized in my sport. So how do I contraindicate that? We're squatting, single leg pressing, whatever it is, and nobody's doing the glutes and the hamstrings and the ratios necessary. So I like to see at least 20% more load on the posterior aspect for the majority of elite sports than I do on the anterior aspect to counteract and contraindicate what's happening and get my body back to a natural neutral position to generate power. The other thing is, what are we doing for the small postural muscles? What are we doing for our balance and our functional ability to stabilize and react? What are we doing for corrective exercises to accommodate the rotator cuff to be strong in all positions? Because not only will the cuff make us less susceptible to injury, it will also increase our ability to perform with strength and power around that joint. All of those factors become really, really appropriate for each sport. Then knowing your sport and how to design your workout to be specific. Just going in and being a great weightlifter doesn't mean you're going to be a great wrestler. So the reality is we lift weights to be better wrestlers. We don't wrestle to be better weightlifters.
Got it.
So when we look at the picture, what we do should be designed and specified to achieve the goals that you have. And if being a great wrestler is your goal, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to do single reps of 700 on the squat.
Right.
It does mean that you have to have significant strength and endurance, because muscular strength and muscular endurance are very, very important. And cardiovascular endurance is very important. And anaerobic endurance is very important in wrestling.
Right.
So designing the program to meet the specificity of the actual sport becomes incredibly important. Incredibly important.
And so do you like kettlebells in that situation because you're getting the cardio and the strength? What's an exercise or two that you have all of your wrestlers doing? So if someone's not doing it now, they can get their shit together and start doing it.
I'll tell you, for one, I like my wrestlers to clean.
Okay.
I like Olympic weightlifting for wrestlers. If you want to be explosive, do explosive things. We already talked about Wolf's Law, right?
Yep.
You do everything you do is slow, you're going to get slower. If everything you do is fast and explosive, you're going to get faster. So there's a component that I usually write in phases with wrestling. We'll do a little bit of hypertrophication to increase the cross-sectional area of muscle, higher repetition, anaerobic phases with weight to exhaust. Then we go from that into a strength phase where we get down in the lower repetitions, between your 8s down to your 3s in that area, and we've developed strength. We start adding load. Then after that, I like to go into a power transfer and do everything fast for 5 or 6 weeks. Then I go into a power endurance phase. everything fast, explosive with endurance. Letting my body build the number of sarcomeres in parallel, which sarcomeres are the smallest contractile unit of the muscle. Okay, I'm trying to accommodate as many of them as parallel as possible in hypertrophy, because hypertrophy means increased cross-sectional area. So I'm trying to increase the cross-sectional area of the muscle so I can lay down more of those filaments in parallel. Then in the strength phase, I'm trying to recruit more of them per contraction. Now I got more strength. Then I'm going to say, now I'm going to recruit the ones that I taught to fire that weren't firing before, and the ones that I laid down, and I'm going to teach them to fire faster for wrestling. Then I'm going to convert the ones that are firing faster to endurance. So now they're firing fast and they have tremendous endurance. And that's where it comes down to being able to elicit the science in the right phasing to get the end result for wrestling. And, you know, I love cleans. I love explosive exercises. We probably do in our wrestling phase 400 different exercises, I would guess.
I'm just curious, what are a couple others besides cleans that come to the top of mind for you?
We do all kinds of stuff. We do banded resistive exercises for shots. We do mobilization exercises for just finishes. So like our guys, in between our exercises, normally we'll do a lifting type exercise, depending upon what phase we're in. Let's take the last phase, right? Power endurance. We might have a lifting exercise followed by an explosive anaerobic exercise, followed by a cardiovascular exercise, and then converted back to a mobilization and small muscle group exercise.
Got it.
That one's kind of unique. In the strength phase, a little different. We'll do a loaded exercise followed by mobilization and small muscle group activations, and then core, and then back into another exercise. So wrestling, there are so many different exercises that we do, but I like lunges. I like single leg rear foot elevated squats. I like dumbbell lunges where it's a little different. You know, than the standard dumbbell lunge, you know, we're vertical with our shin.
Yep.
We're coming straight down. We're coming straight up. We do a shot lunge where I actually get them in the position of contact on a leg, and then they start stagnant, and they have to blow out of that shot with the dumbbell and come through, maintaining a rigid spine, because what happens oftentimes is when that dumbbell pulls, we fold. Well, it also happens when we shoot, and guy plants your face in the mat and spins behind you, and you got a problem.
Mm-hmm.
So the reality is if I can lock that in, keep the integrity of my spine, keep my glute activated, drive through with my hips, and pick you up, you're on your back versus me on my face. And I prefer the other guy than me on my face. So we do a lot of different variations of exercise and accommodation, but very specific to the needs of the sport of wrestling, not things that would atypically be done for football or others.
See, that's what I'm talking about. You're like that example of the lunge where you start at a shot position, you come up. Like, you don't see many people doing that. And now I have to ask you this, just because I'm starting to hear a little bit more of this, and it kind of irks me. Is there any truth to the fact that you're not supposed to stretch after working out?
Okay, so this is
set me straight on this, will you?
This is what I love about my field. Okay, so we find circumstances that are correct, and we blanket them for all circumstances. But that's not how the human anatomy works. Doesn't make any sense. Inherently, the rule was if I warmed up and I stretched and then I did an explosive exercise right after stretching, I would produce less explosive force, which is correct. And why that is I'm stretching the cross bridges between actin and myosin, therefore there's not as many contact. Well, every time you stretch, you don't lose neurological function. So that's a great answer for the right circumstance of stretching right before an activity and then going. But the reality is eventually those fibers return and they're a little more elastic. Otherwise, we'd be walking around the gym and in the wrestling room with parts of our body that just didn't work after we stretched. So in reality, they are correct that active stretching is better, doing movements that engage your fibers. If you really want to correct something in your body, you want to create elasticity on one side and activation on the other in that same range. Because a lot of times when we're impeded elastically, it's because we have a deficit on the other side neurologically that isn't allowing. Think of this pen as a tower. If I tighten a cable here, and there's a cable here, it doesn't matter what I do in this range. I can't get there anyway.
Right.
Right? So I've got to loosen this cable and then tighten this cable to get it back to neutral. So if I want, I've got to kind of increase range in one side and activate on the other side to get it back. So the way we stretch becomes important. We still do some stretching once we're warm because I want to create elasticity in the tissue. And then we do activations and functional mobilizations with that. But the idea that you stretch and your fibers somehow inherently never work again is completely ridiculous. So stretching is still a major part of what we do, in composite with activations and functional movements that we do to allow for the joint to be functionally active through its full range of motion, and in turn sustain that position by tightening this cable, right? Instead of just having to go back as soon as I stretch. So looking at that, stretching is not the devil. We're not, it's not, and I've heard like, well, a cheetah doesn't stretch when it hunts. Okay, well, I'm not a cheetah.
Yeah.
I don't run 70 mile an hour. I also don't run on 4 legs and weight bear a dissipation of twice the capacity of what I run on with 2 legs. And a cheetah's legs are definitely designed specifically different than mine, the way they engage the hip. So that's a pretty dumb statement.
Yeah.
The reality is we need to do what we do as human beings to make us more effective. Increasing range of motion is extremely important. Injuries reduce, power increases. Let's take a look. If I take a manhole cover and I give you a long bar and a short bar, which one do you want to pry open the cover?
Yeah, long one, yeah.
Why? Greater torque. So if I decrease range of motion, do I have less torque? Yes. Simple as that.
Right.
So inherently you are correct. That's a really dumb generalized statement that is correct in certain specificities, but not something I would avoid doing as stretching is concerned.
But after like a wrestling practice, there's nothing wrong with getting a stretch, is what you're saying.
My guys stretch every time.
I mean,
they go in, stretch, they do some active range of motions with the stretch, and they're done.
And I think I like that there's people challenging the status quo, because especially in wrestling, the status quo permeates in a lot of times for the wrong reasons, I think. So I appreciate that. But this came up recently. I don't know if you're privy to this. You're probably so focused you didn't see it. But Kyle Dake and Jordan Burroughs had a heated argument on a podcast recently, and Dake's telling JB, he's like, you probably still stretch after your workouts, and JB's like, what? He's like, and Dake's part of this, he has a guy who's like a functional fitness guy, where kind of like an Ido Portal type character, right? Where they're doing all kinds of movement. And I think there's a lot to be said for that, but they're anti-stretching. And so I'm like, all right, I could see how what you're saying. There's a specific situation, but it's tough to blanket something like that, because wrestling's a sport where you have to be flexible. So I don't know how you could get being able to do the splits. How do you do that if you don't stretch? I don't know. So I had to get your opinion on it, and this just came up in the past week here.
And let's give a primary example. If you get a tight glute and decrease range of motion in your glute, and someone gets in deep on a single leg and turns your leg sideways, your LCL is going.
Mm-hmm.
It's gone. Because if your hip doesn't rotate, something's got to give, and that's your lateral collateral ligament. And you're sitting out, and that happens pretty commonly in wrestling. And the majority of the time that I see it, it's because someone's got a tight glute and their leg wouldn't rotate, and they got legs sucked under, and boom, LCL's gone. So range of motion is imperative for wrestling. Imperative. I mean, doing it my whole life and being around it.
Yeah.
You're not functionally flexible. You're in trouble.
Right.
So, but I do agree. A lot of the stuff he does, we do a ton of functional range of motions and activations. That's all built in between our sets. But we still stretch. We don't pick one area and say this is the only area. I guess that's what makes us unique. We do thousands and thousands of areas of training. Our systems have over 6,000 different variations of exercises within our system. So we're doing all different comparatives, but they're all designed for the right time, the right situation, and with the right piece of information applied to them. To say that anything doesn't work in some circumstance would imply that somebody has all the answers to the human anatomy, and I would say that's only God.
Yep. Fair enough. Okay. Well, Mr. Barwis, I know your time's precious. Last question for you, and I've gone back and forth on, typically I ask people, how did wrestling change your life? But I think it's pretty clear just from talking to you that it's all about, it's really attitude. It's the discipline. It's the work ethic. I want to end with something a little more practical for our listeners. So a lot of the folks listening have kids who are wrestling, and they ask me sometimes, when should they be lifting? Should they be doing body weight? I'm a big proponent of body weight stuff until a certain age. Let's say you have a kid who's a stud sophomore, stud freshman, and he's going into a long summer like we are now. What's a regimen if you only had 5 minutes with that kid, and you'd say, hey, I got 5 minutes with you. I know this isn't how I do my program. I would spend hours and hours with you. But if you got 5 minutes with a kid who lives in Montana, who's never going to get to your facility, and you're going to instruct him on how to put together a summer program, just hit us with it. How many days a week? Are they going an hour? Are they going 20 minutes? Exercise? I'm just curious how you'd answer that if you had, a random kid.
3 days a week, we do strength and conditioning training. In our strength training, on those days, we will do our weightlifting component. We will do our balance and functional training in between. These are the stations that go in between the sets. We will do our core training. We will do our joint stabilization for small muscle groups, injury prevention, prehab type stuff. We will do our plyometrics, our explosive training, and our functional mobilization programs, and our functional flexibility programs. That will all be on Monday, Wednesday, Friday. On Tuesday, Thursday, it's all movement based. So everything is very explosive, sequenced. We do shots with bands. We do transfers. We do footwork to try and accelerate our feet for agility and movement and reactability. A lot of specified movements. But those days are about being purely athletic. We only lift 3 days. The other 2 days are athletic, movement, biomechanical type exercise that are applied to the sport of wrestling. It might be stance in motion and a med ball be thrown at you and the guy's yelling, shot in between coming off. So you're taking an impact and you're following with the shot, and then you're working your feet through some ranges. All of those types of things we do on our Tuesdays and Thursdays. I think the important thing for a young kid to understand would be, don't spend all of your time on strength. Make sure that you're getting strong on those 3 days. And a strength program should really probably last you, if you do hypertrophy first and you're in higher reps of 10 to 15 repetitions, and you're burning yourself out pretty effectively, you can then phase down, do that for about 4 weeks, phase down to the next 6 weeks. Then I would range myself from the 8 repetitions down to about the 3s to get my strength up. And then after that, I would take 5 weeks and go into a power transfer where I would just do explosive movements. Explosive. Do one exercise to load and activate, then do explosive stuff right after it. Because by loading with that exercise, I turn on the sarcomeres, because force and velocity are inverse in the human anatomy, right? As force goes up, velocity goes down. As velocity goes up, force goes down. I always say, which would you lift faster, 135 pounds or 500 pounds? Everybody always says 135. I say, why? They say because it's lighter. It's actually wrong. Inherently, they both fall at 9.8 meters per second, right? They both gravitational pull. Both of them are inanimate objects. They can't create movement. The only thing that changes the speed is you. So how you accommodate the weight changes the velocity. And muscle force has to develop. It can't take place instantaneously. So with that being said, the greater load requires greater sarcomere engagement. Therefore, it takes more time to cause that engagement, so I will move it slower. The less load requires less engagement. Therefore, I can fire faster. So force and velocity will always be inverse. So by turning on a muscle with a load and then firing it fast right after, I inherently activate cross bridges that weren't active and convert them to speed in my sport. Those are things that I would start focusing on to accommodate the neurological change necessary for the sport. And once those are rolling, I take 3 weeks right before the season and I convert that to an anaerobic endurance and just go with my exercises till I'm shot. Because now I've got more of those sarcomeres in parallel, more of them working per unit of contraction, more of them working faster per unit of contraction, more of them working faster and longer per unit of contraction. That's wrestling.
Man, I love it, Coach. Thank you so much for your time. If they want to look you up online, do you have any programs, like online programs right now, or where should they go if they want to learn more from you?
Yeah, we do. We write personalized programs for people, but if you go to our Barwis.com website, we have, Barwis Anywhere. We do programs. We do Olympic athletes, professional athletes, high school, everybody. You name it, we do it.
You can do it remote?
Yeah, yep. And we can even send videos right to their phone. We build them their programs on their phone. They click the video, it shows them the exercise, the program's done, and they just go about and do it.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for your time, sir. I greatly appreciate it. Have a great day.
My honor, brother. God bless. Be safe.
And all great things must come to an end. If you want to hear more from the podcast, text WRESTLE to 555-888. That's WRESTLE to 555-888. You can also find us on Instagram, Wrestling Changed My Life, Twitter, Ryan_N_Warner, as well as our website, WrestlingChangeMyLife.com. Take care of y'all. Calm. 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 Take care of y'all.